Of course. Here's a compassionate and emotionally grounded 500-word story built around the topic. Don't rush these 5 decisions if you've just lost your husband. Emma's quiet strength. 5 decisions she refused to rush after losing her husband. The world grew silent the day Emma lost Robert. After 42 years of marriage, his absence filled the house like a heavy fog. Quiet, still, suffocating. Friends and family surrounded her in the beginning, offering support, casseroles, and advice. "You should sell the house," someone said. "Get a lawyer right away," said another. "You need to start moving forward." But Emma wasn't ready. And she knew, deep in her soul, that some decisions couldn't be made while her heart was still trying to breathe again. The first decision she refused to rush was selling the house. Everyone meant well, thinking a smaller place would be easier, but every corner of that home whispered memories. His favorite chair, the worn spot by the kitchen counter where he leaned while she cooked, they were sacred now. She knew downsizing might come later, but not yet. The second decision was about finances. She took time before changing bank accounts or moving investments. A kind financial advisor told her, "Grief is a foggy lens. Wait until things clear." So she gave herself permission to pause, ask questions, and not feel pressured. Then came the third decision: what to do with his belongings. The clothes in his closet, his books, his tools, each item told a story. Emma didn't box them up right away. Some things stayed where they were. Some she gently gave to family. It took months, and it was painful, but it felt right. The fourth decision was about social commitments. Friends invited her to events, church outings, even trips. But Emma chose stillness. She wasn't ready to be in crowds, to laugh when she didn't feel like laughing. She found solace in morning walks, journaling, and phone calls with her sister. Slowly, at her own pace, she returned to the world. And then there was the fifth decision, perhaps the hardest: who she was without him. She'd been Robert's wife for so long. Now she was just Emma, alone. This wasn't something to be fixed with a to-do list or a new hobby. She gave herself the space to rediscover who she was, gently, day by day. Through it all, Emma learned that grief has no schedule. There's no timeline for healing, no right way to move forward. Rushing would have only deepened the ache. Instead, she honored the love she had by making careful, tender decisions when she was ready. In time, the fog lifted a little. She opened the curtains more often. She smiled at old photographs instead of crying. And she knew that in waiting, not rushing, she had given herself a gift: the grace to grieve with dignity, and the strength to start again when her heart was truly ready. Would you like to turn a quote or passage from this story into a voiceover? Certainly. Here's an additional 500-word paragraph that continues Emma's story and deepens the emotional arc, showing her gradual healing and self-discovery. As the months unfolded, Emma began to notice small shifts, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like the way light filtered through the kitchen window in the early morning. There was a time when that light had fallen on Robert sipping coffee, reading the newspaper, his glasses low on his nose. Now, it fell on an empty chair, but the warmth remained. Emma started sitting there herself, a quiet act of reclaiming space. She brought her journal, a pen, and her thoughts. Slowly, she began to write, not just about Robert, but about herself. What she missed, what scared her, and eventually, what still sparked curiosity in her soul. She wasn't writing to forget. She was writing to remember and to begin again. Emma also started tending the garden Robert had once loved. For years, she'd left it to him. The trimming, the planting, the harvesting. She barely knew the names of the flowers he'd chosen. But that spring, she knelt in the dirt and began learning. She pruned his roses, planted lavender, and added a small bench beside the tree they'd planted together on their 30th anniversary. The act of gardening was healing. It was work, yes, but it was also rhythm, purpose, and renewal. Every bloom felt like a message. Keep going. The more she cared for the garden, the more she began to let people back into her life. At first, it was just her neighbor, Carol, who brought over cuttings and gardening tips. Then it was her niece, Lily, who stopped by to bake banana bread and ask questions about Uncle Robert's old stories. Emma found herself sharing memories and even laughing at times. She realized she didn't have to be fine to be present. She just had to be real. Later that summer, Emma joined a small grief support group at her community center. She hesitated at first. Wasn't grief something you carried alone? But when she walked into that room filled with strangers and shared Robert's name, something shifted. She wasn't alone. Each story mirrored her pain in some way, and each face offered quiet validation. The group didn't offer solutions. It offered space. And in that space, Emma found a little more of herself. She began to understand that healing wasn't about returning to the life she had. It was about shaping the life she still could have. Bit by bit, she picked up new routines. She learned to cook for one without sadness. She volunteered once a week at the library. She signed up for a watercolor class. She even took a short weekend trip on her own, a quiet retreat to a nearby lake they once visited together. She cried, yes, but she also watched the sunset and whispered a thank you to the sky. Emma knew she would always carry Robert with her. But she also understood now that her story hadn't ended when his did. It had changed. And that change, painful as it was, carried within it the possibility of grace. Would you like to use a short excerpt from this for your free voiceover sample? Of course. Here's a 200-word paragraph that gently concludes Emma's journey while reinforcing the theme of patience and healing. By the time a full year had passed, Emma had come to see her grief not as something to overcome, but as something to carry with care. It had softened, somehow, still there, still aching at times, but no longer the sharp, overwhelming weight it once was. She could sit in silence without drowning in it. She could look at Robert's photograph and smile more often than she cried. And though she still had difficult days, she no longer feared them. They were part of love, part of remembering. One morning, as she sipped her coffee by the window, she realized something profound. She had kept living. Not just existing, but truly living in her own way, in her own time. Every decision she'd taken slowly had helped her rebuild a life with gentleness and intention. There was no rushing what the heart needs time to understand. And in honoring that pace, Emma had not only honored Robert's memory, she had honored herself. She may have started this chapter in the shadow of loss, but she was continuing it in the quiet strength of hope. Would you like a short passage from Emma's journey turned into a voiceover sample?